Today we're going to be installing the windows on the exterior of the van. But I don't just want to make this a straightforward installation video because I feel like there's just enough of those on the internet in this day and age. And I've broken this video up with the YouTube timestamps feature below, so you can just skip around and watch the parts that are interesting to you. So as with almost every single thing in a camper build, it's not just all benefits. There are actually pros and cons with installing windows. First, I'm going to start out with the cons and then we'll get into the pros. So the number one con of installing windows is the fact that they create like a thermal bridge and allow a lot of heat to conduct in and out of the van. This is a bad thing in both winter and summer, but in my opinion, it's particularly bad in the summer. You're going to get significantly more heat coming in through the windows of your vans than you would in the insulated panels that don't have windows. It's not just like a mild inconvenience, like in a camper in particular, the windows will generate so much heat on a hot day that I'll typically actually just have all my window covers up / closed. Even if you have a 12-volt air conditioner like I do that runs off the battery bank that you can run while you're sitting camped, it's not going to combat the heat that gets transferred into the van with the windows. Con number two is obviously cost. I think the standard CR Lawrence windows for a camper van on a Sprinter are like almost $1,000 a piece now. Next con for windows is that they add more complexity and failure points to your van build. Obviously, if you're going to cut a massive hole into the side of your van and install an aftermarket window, there's a chance over time that that thing will leak or it will get scratched or cracked. That is all of the cons that I could think of for windows in a van. You guys can think of more. Please add them in the comment section below. Now let's move on to the fun part of windows, which are all the benefits of having them. First benefit of windows is obviously having more natural light on the inside of your van. Benefit number two, and I personally think that this is the best reason to install windows, the ventilation that you get by having windows, particularly the types of windows that can open. This isn't going to be true for the fixed windows that come on a passenger van, but pretty much all aftermarket camper windows nowadays are going to open in some way or another. That's going to allow you to have ventilation. I don't think I've ever actually camped and not had one or two of the windows open plus one or two of the fans, which is different than when you're at home. I don't always have windows open when I'm in my house, but in a camper, it's really nice. In fact, I'd borderline say mandatory to just have at least one window open for airflow. Benefit number three, I think is actually really significant and almost nobody talks about this, but it's the drivability of your van. Vans like the E350 that we just bought that has no windows at all, well, it technically has some in the back, but has none on the sides. Guys, they're really, really hard to drive. Way harder to drive than any passenger car that's surrounded by windows. This isn't something you would understand unless you've driven a cargo van that doesn't have windows in it before, but it's just way scarier trying to merge into different lanes or take turns when you can't see out of the sides as you're turning your head. I constantly find myself reaching around and trying to stick my head out on both sides before I merge any lane. So having windows on it and increasing the drivability is actually, in my opinion, basically mandatory. And when we made the decision that I'm going to be daily driving the E350 around so that we can have fewer cars, I pretty much immediately decided to go and order windows. So yeah, adding windows purely for the sake of drivability is definitely a benefit of having them. That covers all the pros and cons that I could think of. Once again, if I missed anything that you think is a benefit or a negative for having windows, please put that in the comment below so that other people can have that information available to them. And honestly, I've spent the last couple weeks just racking my brain thinking of these things, and I'm really curious if I missed anything. So next section of the video here, I'm going to talk about the quantity of windows that I recommend installing and the placement of those particular windows. The quantity of windows that I recommend is actually a pretty simple rule. I do recommend installing as few windows as possible. Now, I still think that adds a lot of ambiguity because I know when I first got into this van stuff, and I've talked to some people who haven't built any vans yet, and they're just I want all the windows because I want all the natural light and I want to be able to have that beautiful van life experience where I'm posted up on a beach and I can just look 360 degrees and see all the beauty around me. I don't think that that's a particularly good goal to have. If that is your goal, take whatever car you have right now, go to the beach, park it and sit in there for 2 hours without the air conditioning on or anything, and then determine for yourself if you still have that goal, because I'm pretty sure you won't. I think having a bare minimum amount of visibility around you while you're driving and while you're sitting camped in your van is the most reasonable version of that goal. On the flip side, it also sucks to be in a van that's just a completely dark cargo van with no windows at all. You feel a little bit trapped and unaware of what's happening around you. So in general, I think having a few windows is really good, but as few as possible is the best. As far as where to place those windows, that does kind of depend on the layout that you have. I would absolutely 100% of the time prioritize installing windows towards the front part of the cargo area in your van. And the primary reason for that is just that drivability element that I covered in the pros and cons list. If you prioritize putting the windows towards the front part of the cargo area, it's just going to make driving the van a lot easier, and you'll be able to see when you're switching lanes and stuff like that, which cars are around you. And then in my mind, priority number 2 for the placement of your windows is somewhere near where you sleep. For example, in this van, our bed is kind of in the standard area in the back of the van, and we have 2 little sleeping windows above the bed that we can see out of while we're sleeping in bed. And the reason that I think that that's the second most important place to put windows is just because, like, when you're sleeping, having that ventilation back there is really, really nice. It helps you sleep a lot better. It just makes sleeping in your van way more comfortable. And then behind those 2 priorities, it gets real ambiguous real quickly. You could decide to put windows in the very back of your van so that you have some visibility out of the rear. And at that same kind of third priority level, you really want to think about the ventilation and how the air is going to move through your van as a whole. You want there to be a lot of air flowing through the whole vehicle so that there's not one part of your van that's super stuffy to be in. So if your roof fan is going to be in the front of the van, you want to maximize airflow by having a window in the back of the van, and vice versa. These are all things to think about in the large game of trade-offs when you're designing a camper. I will put links to the Arctic Tern windows as well as the vented and fixed CR Lawrence windows that I recommend for all different types of vans in the video description below if you want to buy some for your own van. I've broken this down into 3 different categories of windows. I'm going to start with the worst, and I'm going to work our way up to what I think are the best camper windows you can buy. So in third/last place, I have the fixed glass windows. Those are any windows that are made out of a sheet of glass or tempered glass and don't open. These are in last place because these types of windows provide minimal benefits and have maximum negatives. They do provide the benefit of being able to see out of them and giving you some natural light while you're in the van, but they have the cons of not providing any airflow, and they also have a maximum amount of heat transfer in the van. You want to avoid fixed glass windows at all costs. That being said, sometimes you have no other choice. Like, we are going to be installing 2 fixed glass windows on the E350. I'll get more into that once we actually get there. Category number 2 are the vented glass windows, is what I'm calling them. So they're any camper windows that you can install that are made out of glass, but they have some sort of venting mechanism, whether it's a tilt out mechanism or a sliding window that opens with a screen and allows airflow. These are second best because they do provide more benefits than the fixed glass ones, but they still have the con of being made out of single pane glass, which is the absolute worst material for heat transfer. You're going to get a ton of heat penetrating into your van in the summer, and they're going to be really, really cold to sit next to in the winter. Some of the most popular van windows for pretty much all types of conversions are the CR Lawrence windows, and they're all vented glass windows, or at least most of them are. Once again, we are going to be using CR Lawrence windows in the E350, but to be honest, that's mostly because they're the only windows that I could find that will match the curvature of the old Ford vans. They're much more curved than the modern Sprinters and Transits and stuff. And then one thing that I didn't really think about till right now, but it's kind of a benefit of the glass windows, I guess, is the fact that they look nice on the outside. They look much more factory. They look much more sleek than the number 1 category. So let's move to the first place windows. In my opinion, these are the windows that you should consider first and try to figure out how to get into your van before you consider anything from category 2 or category 3. And those are the dual pane acrylic windows. Those are actually the windows that we have installed in this van right here. You can see one right next to me here. And the reason why these are so much better, in my opinion, than the single pane glass windows is just because they have way higher insulation value than a single pane of glass. Not only that, but most of the time, these dual pane acrylic windows are like full tilt out versions. So if you're going to open it at all, it gives you a lot of airflow. And a kind of side benefit is that they usually make them in smaller rectangular sizes. So you don't need to install such a big window. You can get a lot of the benefits of having a medium to small size window. Not to mention all these dual pane acrylic windows, particularly the Arctic Tern ones that I strongly recommend and used in this van. They come with this dual bug screen and blackout curtain feature. So you don't actually have to buy dedicated window covers that you have to put up and magnetize and then roll up and put away somewhere. They're just built directly into the window and makes it really convenient, really, really nice to just use the windows. And I am gonna actually add a bonus section because I just thought of it right now. This van right here, the zombie van, we've had it for about 5 years now. And I think that this van has the best possible window setup that you could plan for a vehicle. I think we have it dialed with this van right here. So when we originally bought the zombie van, it was just a bare cargo van and it had no windows in it at all whatsoever. On the driver's side here, we have a very long Arctic Tern dual pane acrylic window. And then in the back above the bed, we have a skinny Arctic Tern dual pane acrylic window. And then going over to the driver's side here, it's pretty much the same thing. We have two Arctic Tern windows here. This one's the same as the driver's side. This one's almost the same as the passenger side. It's just a little bit smaller because we have this vertical cabinet right here. I think in this van, we subconsciously adhered to all the guidelines that I recommended to you guys in this video. We have as few windows as possible. They're all dual pane acrylic. And with the two max fans that we have on the top, one in the back and one in the front, I think we have really, really good airflow throughout the entire vehicle when we're camped. I did do a dedicated installation video on the Arctic Tern windows in this van a few years ago when I did that project. That's on the channel if you want to check it out. I wanted to start out with this van's window setup before we talk about the strategy that we came up with for the windows in this van, because admittedly, it's just not as good. What I realized when I started researching windows for this van is that these old Ford E350 vans are much more curved in their bodies than the more modern Sprinters and Transit vans. So I had to find windows that would actually fit on the outside of this van here without warping the wall panels after they've been installed. In fact, you can kind of see it on this van. The Arctic Tern windows only come in a flat version, and there is still some curvature to these modern vans. They're not completely smooth. So you can probably see it here. These Arctic Tern windows have slightly warped the metal, but in my opinion, it's not that bad. So we ended up buying 4 net new windows. 3 of them are going to go on the passenger side here, and 1 is going to go on the driver's side. Let's start by talking about the passenger first. So since this van didn't come with any windows on what they call the barn doors, which are just the kind of like where the sliding door would be, they call them barn doors. The first 2 are unfortunately in category 3, which is my least favorite kind of camper windows. They're fixed glass C.R. Lawrence windows. It's really important when you're driving this vehicle to be able to see out of the passenger side, and that is the most critical area to be able to see out of. So that's why we're using fixed glass ones for there. The next 2 windows that we're going to be installing are vented glass windows. So they are in category 2. They're also going to be C.R. Lawrence windows, but they're what C.R. Lawrence calls the universal fit window. And they're more specifically designed for these old school vans that have the pretty drastic curvature to them. So we're going to be installing 1 vented glass window behind the barn doors on the passenger side here. And then we're going to be installing the second same exact window right behind the driver window. That's going to give us really good visibility on both sides of the van while we're driving it around, and it's going to give us pretty good ventilation because we have vented windows on both sides, so you're going to get that airflow. And I almost forgot to mention, although we're installing 4 net new windows, we are actually going to be improving these windows pretty significantly by swapping them out from the fixed glass version that's in there right now to a vented glass version. Thankfully, Ford makes an OEM pop-out window so that we can get airflow through the back of the van and both sides. Now we're going to start doing the actual install of the windows on this van. Okay, so these are the 6 windows that we are going to be installing in the van. We have the 2 C.R. Lawrence universal pop-out windows. We have the barn door windows here, which are just fixed glass, but they're also made by C.R. Lawrence. And then we have the 2 Ford rear pop-out windows. Very first impressions are actually the CR Lawrence windows are pretty nice. Like they look very, very sleek. So I think the best one to start with is actually gonna be one of the universal windows that we're gonna do behind the driver's seat. So these windows literally come with 3 things in the box. You get the window itself, you get this trim ring that's used to clamp it on the inside of the van, and then you get that little baggie of screws. So the very first step for installing this window is going to be creating a cardboard template, which we are going to use to trace the cutout where we're actually going to cut the hole in the van. Something I have not yet mentioned, but is very, very important, and it's a philosophy that we use throughout the entirety of this van build. You really want to do one window at a time in this van because you're going to learn things for each window that you do. And if you just do them all in a batch at the very start, any mistakes that you make will just be replicated all 4 times. So in order to minimize mistakes and strive for maximum overall perfection, one window at a time, you're gonna do the template, you're gonna cut it out, you're gonna install the window, then you're gonna move on to the next one. Very good philosophy for an entire van build, especially if you're a DIYer / first timer. This comes from the legendary Toyota manufacturing philosophy, and it's the reason why Toyota has such reliable cars. So, all right, so we've got our first window, and I just uninstalled the little twisty handle to get the window thing out because basically this thing protrudes and we wanna trace it from the bottom up. So since this window is so curved, I'm actually going to try and stuff this thing down the middle underneath so that the cardboard better conforms to the curvature of the window. Gonna do one more just so that we get a nice flush fit. So now when we press down on this window with a little bit of pressure, I can tell that the cardboard is fitting flush underneath it, and we are ready to trace out the template. Brand new Sharpie, worth the investment. So we have our Sharpie outlined. Honestly, tracing out this line here is way harder than it sounds because on the side without the flap, it touches flush against the cardboard and you can mark it directly. But over here, there's about a 1/4 inch gap. So you kind of have to do that thing with your pen where you just guesstimate the direct underneath line placement. Now it's time to take the trusty old scissors and cut this puppy out. Started out by doing a rough cut because it's a lot easier to get really accurate cuts with scissors on cardboard when there's less material hanging off the edges. This is our template. Let's go ahead and see if it matches the window at all whatsoever. Okay, so after taping this template down, there are certain edges like this one right here where it lines up perfectly with the metal frame. Then there are other edges, particularly this one here that had that 1/4 inch of an air gap where you can see it doesn't quite perfectly follow. It's somewhat close, but not as perfect as it needs to be for something this serious. Like this corner right here, see how it sticks out just a little bit? Then it matches back up there, and it sticks back out a little bit. Well, what we're going to do to address that is basically treat this as our version 1 template. I'm going to modify it by placing tape on the places where it needs to be expanded a little bit and then just trimming off with scissors anywhere it needs to be cut. And we're going to trace it onto a new template that hopefully fits perfectly. So this is our template V1.5 now, and we are going to just lay it onto a new piece of cardboard. Now we're going to trace it back out with the expanded edges that I made. We have V2. Let's see if it fits well. By the way, CR Lawrence, if you guys are watching, would it kill you guys to put some templates in the box? I think our V2 is going to be about as perfect as we could ever hope to get this thing. Kind of tough with the camera angle, but you can see even on the hard side here, we have a flush up and down line. And one thing I'm doing before the next step is you want to make sure to just note the orientation at which the template is at right now. So if I look under the window, that's the bottom, that's the top. And then this face right here that we're looking at should be up against the van. You might think I'm crazy because yes, this is a symmetrical rectangular window, but with the nature of just marginal error in both your templating and the manufacturing of the window, it's better to trace it directly onto the van exactly how you're seeing it with your eyes right here, because that's going to reduce any of the imperfections. And so the goal of this next step is going to be finding the perfect place to effectively tape this template on the van, trace it out with a Sharpie so that we can know exactly where to cut our hole. The reason this is such a hard thing to do is because we could see where we want it on the outside, but if we go around to the inside of the van, you can't tell exactly where that outside line is because there's a lot more corrugated metal. So now I'm going to spend some time basically putting this template up and finding the perfect location for the hole cutout. I just had to remind myself, and I thought maybe it's worth reminding you guys, the window is bigger than the template, guys. Like, it's going to look bigger from the outside because the glass protrudes about an inch around the outside here. So just keep that in mind. I recruited my assistant out of bed this morning for this step, and she's not very happy about it. Okay, I need you to hold the window up against the van. So we spent a solid 30 minutes and we disrupted our girlfriend's beauty rest. So a lot of sacrifices were made, but I do think we have the perfect window position here. One thing to look out for is that a lot of the times these lines, both the bottom one and the top one, are actually not straight on these vans. So I wouldn't use those as a 100% source of truth as far as the relative distance between those in your template. Honestly, I think the best way to ensure that the template is in the perfect location is to use your eyes. So I'm pretty sure at this point, this is where we want to drill the hole, but now comes to the point where we're going to use those last marks that we made on the template. So now we have to determine if this template location is not only perfect on the outside, but if it's actually going to be perfect on the inside as well. So what I'm going to do is actually drill a hole with a little tiny drill bit in the 4 corner locations that we marked. And the reason that we put them 3 inches in on all sides here is because even if we messed it up a little bit, there's no way that I missed this by 3 inches. I mean, maybe I missed it by like an inch at most. I got a brand new set of drill bits for this van. Looking forward to using these. We're just gonna use a super tiny one, but also not so tiny that I'm like at risk of breaking it off. So I think this one right here will be perfect. Moment of truth, let's go ahead and see what it looks like in the inside of the van. I'm actually very, very pleased. You can see there's a hole there, there, and there. So my first reaction is that they're evenly spaced between the inside corrugated metal pieces here by a perfect amount. Actually, we're gonna take this template off and put it on the inside just to get a really good idea of exactly how the inside frame is gonna fit. But before we do that, we actually are gonna trace this template out onto the van wall with a Sharpie, just so that we have it marked in case this is the right location. Okay, so we mounted the template on the inside here, and if I hold the trim ring up to it, it's actually pretty dang perfect. We're gonna have to do a lot of cutting on the inside portion of the sheet metal here, but honestly, there's really no way to avoid that to begin with. So I think this is gonna be the perfect location. Okay, so now starts for the very intense part. We're only gonna use a couple of different tools for this, cutting out of the window hole here. First one is a drill with a large, like 3/8 or bigger drill bit that's big enough to basically fit one of these blades into so you can start your cut. And then we are going to use our cordless jigsaw with some metal cutting blades from Bosch. These are by far the best metal cutting blades I've ever used, and they just make the cut a lot cleaner and they don't rattle the panel around very much. It's just a very smooth cut. We got 2 different types of metal cutting blades from Bosch here. One of them is a scroll blade and one of them is a straight cutting blade. I'm probably gonna use the straight cutting blade for the long straight sections and then the scroll blades for the curves on the edges of the window. I'll put links to these tools, these blades, and the drill bits in the video description below. You really want to make sure you have a full battery for your jigsaw. If it's not full battery, your blade is going to catch on the edges of the van and it'll come bouncing out and damage your paint. You also want to make sure that your jigsaw is set to the straight up and down position and not the fast cutting, like rotating position. And if your jigsaw has a speed setting, you want to make sure that it's like at the very top one. One note is I did tape the bottom of the jigsaw and then I added some tape around the edges just because we don't want to scratch the paint as this thing is rubbing up against it. I have heard that some people prefer a tool that's not a jigsaw, but to be honest, I feel like I can get really accurate cuts with this thing really precisely. And I haven't had any problems with it like shaking the panels. Now we're going to drill a pilot hole so that we can put our jigsaw blade in there. You go ahead and cut this thing. When you cut, you want to just squeeze the trigger fully like this. You do not want to ease into it by squeezing the trigger softly like this. Don't do that. Just commit, squeeze the trigger fully, max speed, and then start moving around slowly. What happens if you start slowing down the blade of the jigsaw is it catches on one of the sides of the metal and it forces your jigsaw to come out and it starts bouncing along the sheet metal of your van, which you're gonna have to repair afterwards. So that's my number one tip. Max speed, full throttle. Just swap to the scrolling blade so that we can do the one of the corners. I just put some tape on the lines that I've already cut just to prevent the metal sheet from falling out the moment that it's been cut out fully. I also left a tab right here where I didn't cut it so that this side can hang on, and that can kind of be the last tab that I use when the window falls out.
Good morning.
Hey, good morning.
Sorry for the noise.
Oh, no. Retrofit, huh?
Oh yeah.
Cool.
Does anyone want candy?
I do.
Stop.
First moment of truth here. We have our hole cut out successfully. It looks pretty good, but we need to make sure that it actually fits the window. Oh geez, yeah. Wow. That's like legit perfect. Somewhat hard to get it in, but not quite. Honestly, I've never cut that perfect of a window hole before. So in the case that I don't mess up and I continue to cut perfect holes, which I hope for, but you guys probably don't because you want to see me mess up and fix it. I have messed up on these a bunch before. Ideally, you want to mess up when it's too small. I've never messed up when it's too big. That's a whole different issue. Some people will use like an angle grinder and a flap disc to try and make it bigger, but I just keep using the jigsaw to cut slightly more and slightly more off, and that's the best solution that I've personally found. We got our first window, and now we got to go on the inside and cut a bunch more metal for the flange to fit. So now we have our hole cut out. We actually need to do even more cutting because this clamp ring needs to be able to sit flush with the sheet metal. And with this corrugated metal that it's coming in contact with, it's not going to be able to clamp the window smoothly up against the surface of the outside of the van so that it's completely sealed. So for this step, in order to cut the inside part of the sheet metal here, we're going to use two different tools. We're going to use the big angle grinder and we're going to use the little angle grinder. This is a Dremel, not an angle grinder. I just have a cutting disc on it, which is the same type of cutting disc that I put on the big one. Let's get cracking. I also see that the hot sparks have melted through my plastic sheeting and are falling through, so I'm gonna get a piece of cardboard to reinforce it. Cardboard didn't fit, we're gonna try this. Let's hope that it doesn't catch on fire. I don't like how many sparks this thing's making, I'm gonna try the shears to see if that'll work. Okay, so this is taking me freaking all day because I'm figuring some stuff out as we go, but it's really, really hard to cut this sheet metal off here. I tried the shears. Those kind of work, but the shears bend the metal quite a bit. So I just went to the hardware store and got about 20 little Dremel cutoff wheels, and I got this metal specific cutoff wheel for the grinder. Alrighty, well, I can say for sure that I'm going to put a link to this exact cutting blade in the description below. This thing was like 10 times more effective than any of the methods I've used so far. I just ripped through the last part of that and it was taking me like 10 minutes per inch before. Okay, so this is our finished result here. And honestly, guys, that was one of the most brutal things I've ever done in any van build, was cutting out that layer of metal. We did successfully not punch any holes through the backside, but holy cow, that sucked. It's also just definitely not my proudest work. Now we are gonna take this tip to the Dremel tool here, and we're gonna go along all of the edges of both the outer panel and the inner sheet metal, and we're just gonna clean them up so that they don't have any super sharp edges on them, so I don't cut myself during the rest of this construction experience. So we got the edges trimmed up. Now all we have to do is scrape off this residue. I'm going to use a little plastic car tool scraper thingy. I'll put links to these in the description below as well. So after all of that, we finally have a flat surface to put our trim ring on. So now all we have to do in order to actually get the window installed is coat the edges that we have now exposed of bare steel with a little bit of spray paint so that they don't rust. So although we use spray paint, I actually don't just spray it on because then it gets everywhere. I spray it into one of these little cups, and then I use a little paintbrush and I paint it onto all the areas that it needs to go. You know what, this is a big enough surface area, I'm gonna say screw it, and I'm just gonna actually spray it on like normal spray paint. Okay, I think this has dried enough for the most part. Let's take the tape off and see what our hole looks like. Okay, our hole for the first window is officially completed. This is the outside here. We do have a little bit of overspray, but honestly, I think that's gonna be concealed by the edges of the window. And then on the inside here, looks like a bit of an abomination. Honestly, it is. But I really wanted to make sure to get paint on every little part of exposed metal. To be honest though, I don't think I'm gonna actually ever spray paint in a van again. I've always painted it on, and this time I got a little bit rushed and I felt like it would be a better idea to spray it. Never gonna do this again. It just, even though it's gonna be covered up and you're not gonna see any of this, I just hate the look of this. So it is officially time to mount our first window. So these universal windows have a rubber or foam bulb seal that is pre-installed around the entire edge of the window. Because these are installed, we're actually not going to add any additional sealant or anything. This right here is all that you should need. So we're basically just going to stick this window on to the outside and then install the clamp ring. Okay, so I have Maddie holding the window from the outside. And now what we need to do is install all of the screws that came with the window through the holes in this trim ring into this little channel that sits on the outside of the window here. So at the moment, there are no holes in this channel. They kind of just expect you to push the screws through it. And so one tip that I saw on another YouTube video is to basically put this trim ring on and then pre-drill the holes so that you can use a hand screwdriver to tighten them manually. And that is exactly what we're going to do here. For pre-drilling the holes for these screws here, I'm using a 5/64 drill bit because it's slightly smaller than the shaft of the screw. For this step, we really only need 2 tools, the drill with our pre-drilling bit, and then a big old meaty screwdriver. Okay, so we're basically gonna start from here and we're just gonna work our way around pre-drilling a hole and then putting a screw in. At this point, I'm pretty confused here because the trim ring doesn't like fully fit around this. It kind of does, kind of doesn't. I honestly think I might have to redo the positioning of this. Main thing that's telling me that is this right here. Basically on the flange, it's not lining up with the little dial thingy. What I've decided to do is start out by lining up the little twist out window mechanism thingy, and then I'm going to kind of go in a random order here to hopefully kind of try and keep the channel lined up all the way around. Drill bit broke, but thankfully I did have an extra. I officially have all the screws in. I would rate that experience as about a 1 out of 10. We did get the screen back in. It's a real tight fit. Okay, so I basically loosened all the screws on the inside so this window can wiggle a little bit. And we really only have like maybe an 1/8 of an inch of play, but I want to get it perfectly centered here. And this is what it looks like from the inside, which I know is a little bit hard to actually see because of the stupid black spray paint that I got lazy and decided to spray on. But the important things that I want to show you guys, this little notch is lined up decently well. It's honestly not perfect, but it's better with that. I did have to overlap the 2 pieces of the ends of the frame here. It was the only way for it to like fit. But we did get every single screw into the channel and they're all screwed down very tight. Cool thing about this window that I haven't showed you guys yet, if we twist this, that's what actually opens the window. So we get a good bit of airflow going. And this is what it looks like from the outside. So it is perfectly centered with the front window. It is also perfectly level. I also tried to continue the same distance on the radius right there so that it gives it kind of a nice even look. And right now on the back we have it so that the bulb seal, which is right there, is compressed a lot, like as much as it can be, pretty much around the whole window. I'm gonna have to look up. I would be incredibly surprised if water gets into this window. We will do a leak test at the end of the video though. It was way easier to install the Arctic turn windows back when I did that originally. I'm gonna go have a number of beers to try and relax, but we'll be back at it again tomorrow. Alrighty, back out on the van. I am feeling quite sore from yesterday's work, but we're just gonna power through. Okay, we got all 4 of the CR Lawrence windows installed. I'm very, very happy so far, but now comes time for the moment of truth, as we like to say. We got to water test them. Basically just gonna hose the car down and go back inside, make sure that there are 0 leaks on the inside of the van. Okay, so what we're checking for here is around the inside of this clamp, if there's any leaks. And this is looking pretty promising. No leaks on that one. I'm not seeing any. And those are the 2 that I sealed myself. Okay, now for the bulb seal. Let's look all the way around. And I sprayed directly into the sides of these windows, guys. But, first 3 windows are leak free. I'm very, very happy about that. Worst thing ever is when you spray it and do the leak test and then something's wrong. You have to rack your brain as to what you could have possibly done wrong in the install, but I can tell you for a fact we did all these installs very well. So that covers all the net new windows that we needed to install, which means no more big holes, or actually any holes that we need to cut into the van. Okay, now that we are done with the time-lapse footage and finished installing the windows, I want to give you guys the collection of tips that I learned with the last 3. Okay, one thing I just learned actually about the jigsaw, I lost it here and it skipped out. Did some damage to the van that I'm gonna have to put some touch-up paint on, but I learned a really valuable lesson. So instead of just full bore pressing the throttle, I will put the jigsaw in there and I will give it the tiniest, like very, very tiny amount of gas, maybe like 2%, just to ensure that the blade is free. If the blade is gonna be stuck on 2 pieces of metal and you give it full bore, that's when you get that bouncing. I still recommend always being at full bore, but when you start your cut, instead of just going from 0 to 100, do it a little 2% just to make sure the blade's free before you start that part of the cut. Another tip is the Diablo metal cutting blade that I used basically saved my life here. For these windows, I only used the Diablo metal cutting blade, and then I used a few cutting blades on the Dremel tool for the corners where I couldn't get the angle grinder into. And honestly, that is the best way to cut this metal, in my opinion. So a tip for using your grinder when you're cutting out the inside skin sheet metal, you want to start by kind of doing an outline and then slowly go deeper and deeper and deeper, rather than cutting all the way through on the first pass, because all these sparks that get generated by the grinder are just little metal flakes, and you don't want those flakes as much as possible falling into the bottom of your wall panels. So if you outline it and then slowly go deeper and deeper, all the sparks are getting flung into the plastic sheeting in this area, and they're not going behind the wall panel. Another tip, I decided to go 1 size up on the drill bit when I'm drilling the pilot holes. I think this is a 3/32 up from a 5/64. 2 tips I really wish I would have known before I started this. Instead of deburring this inside face that we used the angle grinder to cut, it ends up being a really, really gnarly edge. The best way to clean that edge up is with a file bit in your drill. This was like $5. I did this in 1/10 of the time that it took me to do the other ones, and it looks way better. And then on the face that you use the jigsaw for, it ends up being a pretty clean edge. I use this aluminum oxide bit in the drill as well to clean that edge up, since it doesn't need quite as rash of a bit against it. Also, I have learned exactly how to make it so that these 2 don't overlap. And the way that you do that is you kind of just don't overlap them from the start and do the loose fit thing all around the window, and you can make all the screws fit into a channel without overlapping this thing. You don't have to tighten all the corners down. You just have to make sure that the screws can fit into the channel in all of the holes. The lines in the factory panels are not necessarily square. For instance, you can really see it on this window. See how I have this window lined up vertically with the side of that window? And I have the bottom of this window lined up horizontally with this line. But it's off on that line, and it's very off on the top line. So it threw me for a little bit of a loop when I was trying to install this thing, but this is the right way to do this one. So one major difference between these fixed windows and the other one that I installed is these ones do not come with any sort of seal along the inside. So we actually purchased this CR Lawrence van window seal tape. It was very expensive. This was like 50 bucks, but it's CR Lawrence brand, and I kind of just wanted to do this right. Seems kind of like normal weather stripping though. So we're basically going to cut this and tape it along the inside flange here, basically in the exact same spot where that bulb seal is on the other windows. All right, we put the seal on this window. It was very, very easy. It's just adhesive on one side and it gets around the corners very nicely. We got it all the way around. And then we have a seam where we had to start and finish. And that's at the bottom of the window because, I don't know, I feel like that's the best place to put it if you have to have a seam. Been about a week since I installed these windows. What I've noticed is that they kind of creak as you're driving. And I assumed that it was because this metal face was directly up against the metal and spray paint that we put on the window here. And you can kind of see it's already rubbing off a little bit. It was very, very annoying. So I decided to solve it by getting this 1/16 inch thick foam tape. We basically just put this on the part of the mounting flange that's going to touch up against the metal. It just needs to basically create a slight gap between the two pieces of metal touching each other. I do recommend just putting this on the back of the windows the first time that you install it because they will probably creak when you're done. I'll put a link in the description to the stuff that I recommend. So I guess with that, it technically sums up our window video. Overall, that took me about 4 days. I started on Saturday and it is now Tuesday. 2 of those days I did after work. I'm super, super pleased with the increased visibility of these things. I know this was a lengthy video and I thought I would kind of just try making it a little bit longer and including a little bit more details so that you guys could learn all the little nuances of the things I think about while I'm building my van. If you guys do like that longer form of content, definitely leave it in the comments below, or if you didn't like it, I would also appreciate you sharing that. I'm gonna roll a montage of the completed windows just so you guys can get an up close and personal look at how they look now that they're completely done. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.